Okay. Guys, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am seeing a lot of new faces on this call. And so we appreciate you coming on. As always, we like to do this to not only educate you through this process, but also have an opportunity to bring you all together, especially the remote athletes, so they know they're not alone and they have this team that they get to connect with. Before we get started with our special guest tonight, which I'm really excited about, two things. Number one is we have Zwift public workouts starting this Tuesday and Thursday. It's at 6 a.m. Central, and you don't need to look under the club events anymore. You can just go to the public events. And Tuesday, it will be your typical harder workout that we're accustomed to, and it will be based on where we are in the build. Right now, we're working on our peak power or ceiling of power being at the off season. And then from there, we typically extend out as we get closer to race specific work once race season comes about. And then on Thursday, it will always be your endurance workout. I'm not going to be on the ride this week, but we will always try to have a coach on the ride to be able to answer any questions as well. And I will be on some rides in the future to be able to answer any questions as we go. The other thing is YouTube. We launched part 2 of our Florida YouTube video. We would love it if you could watch it, share it with your friends, watch it again, and put in some comments as we're putting a lot of work there just to kind of show everyone what, NVDM is all about. So without further ado, we're going to get started with our special guest, Lat. Lat, I think it would be actually best if you could tell everybody who you are, your background, and then kind of what you're working on right now, and then we'll get into our questions for tonight.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name's Lat Mansour. I am the research lead for HVMN, and our main product is Ketone IQ, as some of you may or may not have heard. It's an exogenous ketones that a lot of athletes are now using for performance boost, whether be it physical performance or cognitive performance. Background-wise, I was born and I grew up in Malaysia. I did my undergraduate in biotechnology in the UK in University of Nottingham, and then I did my master's also in biotechnology from Columbia University in New York, and then decided to go into pharmaceuticals. So I was in a pharmaceutical company for 1.5 years in clinical trials, and then got inspired to go back to school, did my PhD in physiology, anatomy, and genetics, specifically looking at the metabolism of the diabetic heart in hypoxia, which is low oxygen environment. And that was in the University of Oxford back in the UK, because it takes 3 years to do a PhD there instead of 5-6 years here in the US. So then I worked for a startup right off the bat from my PhD graduation in a diabetes management program. And then I also started my own health tech company, helping people understand the blood test results before HVMN found me in 2019. They flew me out here for an interview, offered me a job, and then rest is history pretty much. So now, wearing the HVMN research lead hat, I oversee all the research collaborations, the science, the messaging, the claims around our product, as well as being the principal investigator for our just recently completed phase 2 SDTR, which is a small business transfer grant in collaboration with the DoD and Special Command. It was a $6 million contract, so it was supposed to be a 2.5-year contract, but it got delayed because of the pandemic out to 4.5 years. So it was quite a long journey. In that project, we looked at ketone esters. And then now our sole product is Ketone IQ, which is an R13-butanediol, and happy to answer questions around the differences and all of that.
Awesome. Yeah, I have a list of questions, as you know, so we're definitely going to explain that, because that's one of the most common questions that I get. I think it would be interesting for everyone to hear the ties to like where this all came about, and hearing about like the army and all of that. Yeah, you go ahead.
Sure. I think about more than 20 years ago, DARPA, which is the arm of the army of the military of DoD, they are known to sponsor and pay for grants for ludicrous projects like, humans, robots taking over the world, that sort of thing. And they wanted NIH. They were working with Richard Veitch from NIH, and they wanted a super fuel to help operators in long and demanding journey. And as we all know, all the macronutrients that we know are protein, carbs, and fats. So they're like, well, what else can we do next, right? And granted, at that point, ketogenic diet has been around for way longer than that already, because people have been using ketogenic diet to treat epilepsy for more than 100 years. So the existence of ketone as a source of fuel has been known. However, the only way to get ketone traditionally, or conventionally, could only be achieved via ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting, because you need your insulin level as well as your glucose level to be really low before your body kickstart the ketogenesis in your liver, which is the conversion of fat into ketone bodies. So DARPA funded this project. NIH, together with Oxford, sort of through their research, found means to isolate exogenous ketones. And that allowed us to exogenously intake ketone regardless of our diet, and increase our blood ketone levels. So that is the start. But then a lot of people ask, like, why does the body need ketone to begin with? Like, why do we start the ketogenesis process when we are low on oxygen, when we're low on glucose and insulin? Now, the answer lies on the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is a layer of epithelial cells that prohibits bigger molecules to enter the brain. Fat molecules are too big to bypass the blood-brain barrier, and the brain primarily uses glucose. But when you're fasting or when you're on ketogenic diet, your brain or your whole body will be low on glucose. Therefore, your brain will not have enough energy source, and fats cannot get past. So ketogenesis is the process at which your body uses to convert fat into smaller molecules, i.e. ketones, that can bypass the blood-brain barrier, enters the brain, and become fuel for the brain. Not until later that we realize through all these studies that ketones is actually the brain's preferred fuel. So experiments when exogenous ketones got created and got to the market, researchers are then able to look at the state of mind or the state of the brain when other substrates are available. When glucose is available, they put exogenous ketones in, the brain takes it up right away. Same thing with the heart. Especially with failing hearts, they upregulate ketone metabolism, regardless whether your body has ketones or not. So that itself showed a lot of confidence that ketone is a more efficient fuel when it comes to energy produced per oxygen used. I'll stop there without going too much into the biochemistry and bore you guys. And we'll get on with some questions.
Yeah, so we'll just backtrack a second for some people that just went way over their head. But what is the difference between exogenous, am I saying that right? Exogenous,
yeah.
Exogenous and endogenous. What is the difference?
So endo is internal, exo is external. And when I talked about a ketogenic diet and fasting, where your body creates their own ketones, that's creating your own endogenous ketones. Drinking ketone from a bottle, that would be an exogenous ketone. Now, people ask, what's the difference? Ultimately, when it comes to the molecule, you have to just look at the molecule itself. The three main ketone bodies that we produce in our bodies are acetoacetate, acetone, and beta-hydroxybutyrate. Beta-hydroxybutyrate, BHB, is the main molecule that is used for energy and metabolism. So whenever you hear people talk about ketones, usually when they measure blood ketone levels, that's blood BHB level. Acetone usually come out in the breath. That's fruity smell when people are on keto diet, or even your nail polish remover. That's acetone as well. Acetoacetate, usually you pee it out. So BHB, the body will recognize BHB regardless where it's from, whether it's from your endogenous source or exogenous source. And then the question comes to, like, okay, what are the different exogenous sources that can convert into BHB efficiently and provide you with the optimal level of blood BHB?
Right. And that leads us to the next question that I get a lot of is, what is the difference between a ester, a ketones ester, which there are some products on the market, versus what HVMN is, which is a diol.
Yeah.
Explain that.
So HVMN brought to the market the first ketone ester ever in the world in 2017. Ketone ester is just a chemical name, essentially. It's ketone and bound with another molecule in an ester bond. So the ketone ester, specifically by delta G or ketonate, that is specifically BHB molecule bound with a butanediol molecule in an ester bond. So when you ingest it, your gut esterase, which is your enzyme, will cut the ester bond. It will break it into the two parts, the BHB part and the butanediol. The BHB goes straight into your blood, and the butanediol goes to your liver, gets converted into BHB, giving you a little slow release while quickly spike your blood BHB up using that BHB part. What Ketone IQ is from HVMN right now. So what we notice is that the trend with like ketone esters, and nowadays that is not the only ketone ester in the market. You get BHB bound with butanediol. You also get C6, which is triglyceride fatty acid bound with butanediol. That's by Juvenescence, out of the Bucket Institute. They sell that on Amazon as well. That's ketone diaster. And then you probably see some papers using acetoacetate diaster. That is also acetoacetate bound with butanediol. But that is not, I mean, they are, acetoacetate diaster is approved by FDA GRAS for human consumption. However, I've tasted it. It's worse than Ketone IQ and definitely worse than ketone ester. So I don't think anyone can flavor that as well right now. So there are a lot of ketone esters. So what we notice is that all the common denominator is the butanediol part. And then we're like, why can't we just make a pure R-butanediol that gets converted to BHB? And I think it falls down to a lot of, people saying that, well, butanediol, you can't productize it. You can't patent it because butanediol has been around since the 60s. People have been doing experiments on animals and humans in the 60s on butanediol toxicology, safety, efficacy. And I found an unclassified paper with NASA that they were running experiments with butanediol with new astronauts in the 60s and 70s, which is really interesting. And a lot of these companies, they want to create these ester molecules because then these are synthetic, new, novel molecules that they can patent and monopolize and therefore charge much higher price. And that's also another reason why Ketone IQ is significantly cheaper than these ketone esters. Now, the difference is that let's take ketone monoester, BHB bound with butanediol as an example, versus just butanediol. Ketone ester spikes your blood BHB really high really quickly because of the BHB part. Ketone IQ does not do that because it goes through your liver and your liver act as a gatekeeper. So no matter how much you drink, you will not get overdosed in terms of blood BHB level. But ketone esters is very dose dependent. The more you drink, the higher your blood BHB will go to a point where you will essentially feel sick. Granted, Ketone IQ, we don't, recommend you drink like a whole big 10-serving bottle all at once either. But nonetheless, we don't have that spike of blood BHB. Initially, we thought that spike of blood BHB is really good because we know that BHB is brain's preferred fuel. We know that when you have BHB for endurance athletes, it has glycogen sparing effect. We know when ketones are present, when using carbs and proteins post-exercise, it helps with recovery. So surely the higher the BHB, the better. Then later on, in the past 2 years, there are more studies that showed it's because of the too high of a blood BHB level, it increases blood acidity. And as a result, your body will start upregulating cardiorespiratory stress biomarkers like heart rate, breathing rate, because you're trying to expel all the carbon dioxide out. So instead, what you want with any metabolic molecule there is to reach an optimal level and stay there as long as possible. So that is the key in using exogenous ketones. So you want to get up to between 1 to 2.5 and stay there as long as possible. And it just so happened that Ketone IQ does that because your liver is the slow releasing gatekeeper that allows you to have that subtle increase and not that spike. The reason why ketone ester has that spike is because the BHB portion of the molecule is not being kept by anything. Once it gets released, it goes straight into your blood and nothing regulates it.
Very good. Yeah. So, guys, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat and then we will get to them, and I'll be reading them to you, Lat, as we go. I did see there's one here from Alex. Before we get to it, if I can, because this is kind of in line with what I was going to ask, but you mentioned 3 really important things as to why would someone even take this in the first place? I want you to repeat those 3 things, but then there's also really more benefits as to what you're seeing athletes are getting away from taking ketones. So can you speak to all the benefits?
Sure. So the first thing that I mentioned was the brain's preferred field, so cognitive function in terms of the sharpness, the alertness, the focus. The second point is glycogen sparing effect. So this is especially important for endurance athletes, where they found that their glycogen stores deplete slower compared to those in placebo. The third is recovery. So compounding effect of recovery using ketone as a recovery intervention. In fact, now there is one study using ketone ester that showed increase in EPO, which is very interesting. So I am in contact and we're in discussion to sponsor a study using Ketone IQ, looking specifically at that EPO recovery and all of that with Heel Puff and Peter Haspel's group in Belgium. So they have many papers on exogenous ketones. So this will be very interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's exactly what actually Alex said. He meant to say EPO, not HGH, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, because HGH, I don't think there is any data on that.
Yeah, but he says, do the ketones, he asked about the EPO, which you're now talking about, and then do the ketones at HVMN offer aid in recovery when taken after a hard effort?
Yeah. So that is a really great question, Alex. That's why I'm so excited, because I literally just saw this protocol last week. They proposed to us in terms of like costing and the structure, and we are planning to use Ketone IQ to look at normoxia. So Ketone IQ versus placebo in normoxia, and look at EPO, looking at transcriptomics and metabolomics. So looking at the genetic level as well as the protein level, and then we're going to put them in hypoxic chamber. And then we're going to see if that effect is being overwritten or adding on, whether it's adding on the EPO activation. And then on top of that, if you start training in hypoxia or in like high altitude, does that increase performance even further? So that's that's the research question that we're trying to answer now. In terms of hard effort, yes, I think the recovery aspect of things, a lot of our athletes, especially anecdotally, have come out and spoken on the effects of ketones helping their recovery score, their sleep score, and overall soreness as well. As far as research is concerned, there are only ketone ester studies so far, but I have written a review paper myself, I believe 2-3 years ago. If you search Lat Mansour on PubMed, ketone and recovery, that you should find that paper. Basically, I summarize so far what are the results, what are the different studies that point towards the direction that ketones may be helpful for recovery as a strategy. And that would be looking at glycogen resynthesis, that would be looking at mTOR activation via leucine, the amino acid. So when people take proteins and carbs and ketones, and the protein includes leucine amino acid, they saw specifically mTOR activation, which is very important for protein synthesis. So that helps with recovery as well. And then the third one, I believe they saw an increase in glucose uptake. But that study, they also had a glycemic clamp, which means they infuse the participants with high amount of glucose. So from a scientific point of view, I can argue that it's because you're having such a high amount of glucose, you're going to increase the glucose uptake anyway, regardless. But yeah.
Awesome. Very good. Let me get to one or two questions I have, and then I'm going to get to some that have come through. A quick question. What is the caloric value of one shot of ketones? So people
That would be 70 calories per one shot, or one serving from the big bottle. So that would be 10 grams of butanediol. 10 grams of butanediol will have 70 calories.
And so practical application, we have athletes going out for a 10-mile run, takes them 90 minutes to do it. How would you say they should dose that run? And does intensity differ, like make a difference?
The intensity?
Yeah, so if they're just going for a 10-mile aerobic run, does the dosing change if they're racing versus going easy?
So far, in terms of protocol, has been quite standardized with intensity. It's more of the duration that increases the dosing. So what I would say, if you're going out for a 90-minute run, have a shot or two shots, depending on how big you are, how heavy you are, because most of these studies are body weight matched. So if you're a bigger guy, you know, feel free to have two shots. That's perfectly fine. Half an hour before your run, right? And then you start running. If you want, you can top up 90 minutes into your workout if your workout is longer than that. If you're just doing a 90-minute run, then you should be good, right? But if your workout is, say, 3 hours, then at the 90-minute point, top it up. And if you want, top it up every 2 hours. That's for people who are in ultra endurance. So we've had Ashley Paulson, who won Badwater a few months ago. She took 12 shots in the span of like 22-hour run, because she topped up every 2 hours. In terms of intensity, we have so all that we've talked about is very much focused on endurance exercise, and even until now, there are more endurance athletes who are using it than high intensity and anaerobic athletes, right? We have one study that we have completed. We just submitted it for publication together with University of North Georgia. That study, we looked at anaerobic exercise and really high intensity. We looked at Wingate test. So these participants have to sprint on the bike for 10 seconds as hard as they could, and then 30 seconds rest, and then 10 seconds for five of those bouts. And surprisingly, we did not expect to see any improvement, but surprisingly, we saw a 50-watt average increase in power. Peak power and average power also increase, as well as decrease in fatigue. Mechanism of action, we still don't know why that is, because from a metabolic point of view, glucose should still be the primary source. And we saw that in the respiratory exchange ratio. The RER still says they're burning more glucose, but in the Ketone IQ group, it lowers a little bit. So they're going towards a little bit towards fatty acid, but they are still relying on glucose. So what we think that is pushing that performance parameter would be the effect on the brain. So similar effect to caffeine, sort of analgesic effect, where they feel less painful when they're going through that high intensity anaerobic push, where the lactic acid is building up in those localized muscle areas.
Perfect. Okay, I have just two more questions here, just to be mindful of everyone's time here tonight, because we like to keep the calls to about 35 minutes. So the next one is, I'll just read it from Alex. I've seen some influencers, they're talking about ketones as an alternative to carbs and gels during endurance events. Is this effective? Combination. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So this, a lot of people like to do this because they found something that works for them, and then they're like, you know what, I'm gonna like try use it just on that. I think Ryan Hall did a run on just Ketone IQ as well. I think that falls down to your personal preference and your own metabolism. Some people cannot replace it. They have to have glucose regardless, and you put Ketone IQ on top. Also remember, it has calories, right? You are adding more calories on top of that. So if you take it out, you have to like replace it. You have to think about the calorie intake as well. So I would say experiment it on your own, like on your own body, because as far as the science and the literature goes, we always recommend you to do it, to take Ketone IQ with carbs especially when it comes to performance. So that's the standardized recommendation. But again, you guys are the one out in the field and running, and I'm just in the lab doing my work. So you will know your body and you will know your performance much better than I do.
Awesome. Yeah, I know Charlie used ketones. He's actually on this call.
Yeah,
But
it's a super.
yeah, he did it in conjunction with fueling as many carbs as possible along with ketones, and he could probably speak to that. But out of time, we'll probably get to it in another call. Here's a good question, because we've been talking about this a little bit, and it's from Christian Johnson, and he had found out from Ketone has an alcohol alternative product that they claim will give you a buzz, and its ingredient is solely R13B. They also hold a patent on R13B mixed with water. Is there any info you can provide on the legitimacy of their alcohol alternative using the same ingredients as Ketone IQ? And if HVMN uses a different combination of the patent Ketone has?
That's a great question, Christian. So they came out with butanediol same time we did, right? And we we looked at the studies, we looked at our own pharmacokinetic study. We're like, this is not alcohol, right? Just because butanediol chemically is related to alcohol is not alcohol. It's the same as sugar alcohol. You don't get drunk off of sugar alcohol. Same thing here. And if you think about it, ketone ester, like I said earlier, molecule-wise, chemically, half of it is butanediol. So if you take 25 grams of ketone esters, half of it will be butanediol. And people have been using that for performance since 2017, since we brought it to the market. And now you're going to isolate one part of the molecule and dose it lower and then call it alcohol replacement. It doesn't make sense. So I've come out and called it out many times on social media and on content. And also this patent is super interesting. Ask them for this patent, by the way, because I believe a few months ago, he did pull back on that claim. He pulled back because we were ready to argue with the patent office, because R13 butanediol, like I said, has been around since 60s. It's prior art. So you put some water in there and you want to claim as patent, and then you can monopolize the market? No. We're not going there. So we were ready to go with the science. Like, look, and so we got an official email saying that Ketone pulled back the patent application, as far as I know. But then again, Frank is Frank. We've known him for many years. So, you listen to him and believe at your own cost. He knows some science, I give you that. But a lot of what he claims, it's very on the dodgy side. And for me, I'm a scientist first and foremost. I'm not a businessman. So he's a hustler. I respect him for that. As long as you are saying the right science and you're saying the right data, then that's fine for me. But for me to claim that something is an alcohol and it's causing intoxication when you are selling the same product for performance at a higher dose is hypocrisy to me.
Okay. Thank you for that. So here's a question. So many of our athletes have taken Ketone IQ, and a lot of them respond to it. And everything you've mentioned, they have reported back to feeling, especially like the cognitive benefit of their workout. But every now and again, someone doesn't feel a difference. And we talked about this when I met you. Why? Can you talk about that? Why is that sometimes it just misses?
Yeah. So even in our military study, even with ketone esters, like where you get spikes of BHB, right? When you drink ketone ester, you get 3 to 5, even sometimes 6 to 7 millimolar blood BHB. Out of 10, there'll be like 1 or 2 non-responders, and that's perfectly normal. So some people just can't, we don't know what that is. It's same with biochemistry in anything else. There are going to be people who can't respond, who do not respond well with Ketone IQ, or do not respond at all with exogenous ketones. Unfortunately, we don't know what the exact mechanism of action, or like what is it the liver or is it the muscles? We don't know. There are not enough studies out there that isolate these non-responders and then looking at why they're not responding. The only thing we know is that they cannot, one, increase the blood BHB level. So either there is a malfunction in converting Ketone IQ into blood BHB, or 2, they are good at converting it, but they're using it up really, really quickly. and mopping it up really quickly. But either way, it will be really hard to measure that unless you trace the molecule using radioactive component, because how would we know if you are being if the conversion is happening but the absorption is higher versus conversion is not happening at all?
Awesome. Okay, we have 2 more questions and then we're going to call it, guys. This was one I sent to you, is how do you pass out when you're doing these tests? How do you pass out the efficacy of ketones when an athlete has glucose and store glycogen on board?
How do you pass? What do you mean pass out?
This was a question I got from Coach Harold. I think he's actually on this. Parse means P-A-R-S-E. How do you parse out the efficacy of ketones when an athlete has glucose or stored glycogen on board?
So you would compare, so in a study, typically you would compare ketone arm and then placebo arm, and both of them would show up to the training or to the experiment session empty stomach, and then you will feed them the same exact calories, same exact macronutrients, knowing that they have the same amount of glucose intake in there and the glycogen, and they'll have to fast overnight so that they empty their glycogen stores to begin with. So whatever store they have is what you feed them, and then comparing both ketone and placebo, you'll be able to pass out what is actually causing the improvement in performance.
Perfect. Yep.
Hope that answers you.
I did. Yeah, no, that's perfect. And then last one here from Grant. When taking carbs and ketones at the same time, does the body prioritize ketones over carbs, or are they processed simultaneously? It sounds like ketones go ahead of carbs.
So I'm going to answer this question based on organ specific, because I only know specific organs, like the heart and the brain. It does prioritize it does take up ketones independent of other substrates, meaning that it will still take up glucose, but at the same time, as soon as ketone is available, it will grab it up. As far as muscles go, I do believe it falls down to the intensity of the exercise. So this study with Heal and Jumbo Visma on the EPO will be very interesting, because we are going to be taking muscle biopsies and looking at the muscle recovery with the Ketone IQ versus placebo. So that's going to be super interesting.
When will that come out, the results of that?
Well, we are in the process of sorting out who's paying for it. So, as always, it's who's paying the bill. As long as the bill's paid, like, the work is going to get done. It will be a year kind of study. So probably next year, this time next year, we would have some form of data. Alex
says Jumbo has the money, make them pay.
I know. We're talking with them. I think Kira's leading that conversation. I'm like, you know what? I'll play the scientist card. I'm like, I'm just gonna support from the academic side, and then I'll let you guys, talk money.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate your time this evening. We have gone over a little bit of time, you guys. Appreciate you hanging in with me. This was really great information. I think everyone would agree that they learned a lot today. And guys, for those who have not tried it, I know Charlie has sent over a code where you can get that first order to be able to try it. We'll make sure we get it out to you guys. If you have any questions, let us know and we could advise them.
And feel free to share my email. It's lat@hvmn.com. I'm on social media as well, Lat Mansoor. You can ask on DMs, on emails, whatever that works for you. Happy to answer follow-up questions if you've tried it and then you're like, oh, maybe the dose is not enough, or like maybe the timing is not right. Feel free to double check with me.
Awesome. I appreciate that offer. Thank you so much. Okay, guys, we appreciate you. Have a great week. And then there are a couple athletes we're asking to stay on this call. You know who you are, and we'll see you guys in a second. So thanks, Lat.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys.